Hi there, YouTube. It's time again for Ask Sister Pfister, where you ask your deep and important life questions and I attempt to answer them. So, let's get started. The first question for today comes from Zero Weirdo, great name by the way, who asks, what has compelled you to continue posting on YouTube? You know, to answer this question honestly, I never actually intended to do this. I never had any intention of making more than the one video, my first one. I did that one called A Message for My Jehovah's Witness Family because I was hurt and I was sad and I was really tired of the witness contingent always getting the last word and never having to listen. It was really cathartic for me to say what I needed to say, and then I put it out there. I thought, well, somebody will in my family will eventually see this and it'll get passed around and that'll be the end of it. At least they will have heard me. Or I can imagine that they had. What I did not count on was the veritable avalanche of response that I got from that video. I mean, people who looked me up, sent me email, friended me on social media to say, thank you for telling your story, that you know, I felt the same way. I'm trying to get out. What do I do? I thought, God, you know, I was thinking back to the way I felt when I first left the witnesses and how alone I felt, because we were really always taught that we were the only ones. You know, if you doubt, you're going to be alone. You're the only person who this has ever happened to. I know that getting free of the witnesses was one of the hardest things that I have ever done. And I did it largely before social media was a thing. I think that people who are getting out now really need to see examples of happy and successful and reasonable people out here in the world who have come from a witness background. Because what I am is the opposite of what we were always taught we would become if we left the congregation. I thought, hey, you know, I could actually do some good here. So I made the second video, which was about things I wish someone had told me when I was first getting out. And then when I was doing that video, I got to thinking about other topics that would be interesting to talk about. The more I thought, the more ideas I had. And so then I veered from the more serious to the slightly more hilarious, which is kind of just how I roll. I can't be serious for too long. There are still days where I'm mad and hurt and angry, and I think that that will always happen as long as I have to deal with them on the regular, and I do because of my mother. But generally, I'm a pretty happy person, and I like to laugh at stuff, and oh my gosh, there's so many things to laugh at about what we used to believe. So to answer the question, I do it because I want to help people who are going through what I've already been through. And I want them to know that they're not alone and that it is possible to survive and live a good life out here in the real world. And I do it because right now it's pretty fun. When it stops being fun, I'll probably stop doing it. Although, I do have to think that with my luck, if my witness family members ever do stumble across my YouTube channel, they're probably going to find the video of me ripping into a Kingdom song and never actually listen to the original message that I put out there for them. But that's life. Reality is, honestly, that I doubt they will ever really care enough to look for me, unless they think there's some gossip there. Which, hey, maybe posting XJW videos is gossip. Maybe they will find me. I don't know. But, you know, I'm coming to the point where I don't care anymore. So, next question. So, the second question for today is from a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. And that's fine. Feel the burn, baby. Do you think the elders who are in a judicial committee feel that they are spoken to by God to make their decision? Or do they just judge based on their own opinions and past experiences? Basically, do any of the witnesses believe that they are spoken to directly by God, or would that be considered demons? Wow, what an excellent and thoughtful question. And I want to give you a thoughtful answer. So first, I'm going to give you my personal experience with judicial committees, and my thoughts on those, because I think it's a good object example for you to see. And then, because I have no clue what those men could actually be thinking, I took this question to the horse's mouth and asked a former Jehovah's Witness who used to be an elder and who served on many judicial committees what he thought. And I would like to say thank you to Joe from number 4747 for his honest and thought-provoking response, which I will share with you momentarily. But first, I'm going to give you the personal angle because this is Ask Sister Pfister after all. I have been personally involved in 2 different judicial committees. The first one took place when I was about 7 years old, after my sister and I confessed to our mother that there was the sexual abuse was happening. There were 3 children involved. None of us were baptized, not the perpetrator, not any of the 3 of us. So according to the rules as we understood them at that time, if you weren't baptized, they really couldn't call a judicial committee. I mean, they weren't supposed to. That was supposed to be for baptized people. There probably should not have been a judicial committee, especially not one that was looking into the behavior of the victims, which is what this turned out to be. Why did they have a judicial committee over this? Well, it's because my father had been very recently disfellowshipped, and at the time, he was the presiding overseer. There were at least 4 or 5 hour to 2 hour grilling sessions with me and my sister. And I don't know if the other child involved was interrogated that way. I suspect not, because his parents weren't an object of gossip at the time. But anyway, this all culminated in a meeting at the perpetrator's house in the room where most of the abuse took place. I can't really get too far into it because it upsets me to this day. It upsets me still. Y'all, this is not the way to handle child abuse allegations, regardless of the age of the perpetrator. It is not. So the second judicial committee that I was involved in happened when I was 20 years old and resulted in my disfellowshipping. And I talked a little bit about it in my first video, but in the interest of an excruciatingly complete answer to your question, I'll tell you a little more. When the judicial committee was called, I, in my mind, was not a Jehovah's Witness anymore because despite I was baptized, but I had not been to a meeting in over 18 months. So I figured, why should I spill my guts to them? I'm done. I quit. I had not submitted a disassociation letter like I wanted to do because my mother told me that that was an unforgivable sin and please begged me not to do it. So I didn't. I should have. When I refused to go to this meeting, they kind of came up with this manipulative masterstroke. And they told me that if I did not come, that they would take action against my mother for failing to control me because I lived in her house. The witnesses were her entire life. They were everything to her, and I knew that to take that away from her would be extremely cruel. Now, it didn't occur to me until much later that the cruelty was theirs and not mine. So I went and I listened to their questions and I answered them truthfully until they became really, really invasive. For example, did I climax? Y'all, nobody says climax, okay? What position did we use? Was there any oral sex? How long did it last? They asked about the size of his penis. They asked about things that I just thought were totally irrelevant to the question at hand, which should have been, did you have sex? Are you sorry for it? But when I refused to answer the really nitty-gritty questions, things started to escalate a little bit. So it's probably important to point out at this point that none of the 3-man judicial committee members could by any stretch of the imagination be considered impartial. One of them was an angry stepfather who had kicked out his own disfellowship daughter a few weeks before my committee meeting and clearly was grinding an axe against her. And then another one, who we'll call unwitting granddad, was about to become a grandfather, unbeknownst to him, because his righteous and innocent daughter had been banging a high school athlete during school hours. So that happened. And the last one was this really pompous, misogynist asshole who seemed to delight in being in a position of power. I mean, it just took him right over the edge. The gleam in his eye was completely sexual. It was so gross when he was asking me those questions, and he was very angry for no apparent reason. So when I said, no, I did not have any intention of marrying this guy, this boyfriend that I had, just because we'd had sex, Old Angry turned red and he started huffing. And I did not cave, and I did not give them details, and I did not cry. So they changed their tactics. Now, my mother had told them that I saw auras and that I read unapproved literature and that my worldly friends were into witchcraft. This fact she deduced by herself because they favored black clothes and heavy makeup, which was a style at the time. That was when goth was really in, and all my friends were so into it. And y'all, I was the worst goth in the world. I tried to dress up, you know, because my friends were doing it, and I thought they looked cool, but I looked ridiculous. Anyway, Old Angry said that the aura thing smacked of demonism and witchcraft, and I've already explained in another video how I felt about that. It was very scary to me. And when I said, you really are kidding, right? Like, that's ridiculous. They interpreted that response along with my refusal to provide the blow-by-blow on my sexual experience as unrepentance. Because, see, a repentant person, especially a woman, would have cried and begged. A repentant person would have told them exactly how many times this guy had, thrust and what position and every sound that had been made during the dastardly deed. I mean, it was disgusting. And so since I didn't answer those questions, then their choice was clear. So the axe grinder actually was smiling when he told me that they were going to disfellowship me, even though it was very, very clear that axe grinder and Old Angry had come into the room already having made their decision. And it really didn't have anything to do with me. Now, the only one who seemed to understand how shameful that behavior was the unwitting granddad, who kind of looked down at the floor and wouldn't meet my eyes. I went outside after the meeting and got in my beaten up old car, and the radio didn't work, so I had this boom box in the front seat belted in with like batteries in it so I could listen to music, and hit play, and it so happened that the song called 123 by the Indigo Girls was on. And there's a line in it that says, how long can you be agile, dancing between the altar and the mercy seat? Here's a chance to make a choice. Are you aware of the fire beneath your feet? And that has always just punched me in the gut ever since when I hear that song. Yeah, so I peeled out of the parking lot, and I never have been so angry and so disgusted and so completely free. Later that year, I mentioned in my other video, I went to the doctor and they determined that I had scintillating scotoma, which is a type of migraines. That's where the auras came from. They gave me some medications and I went to therapy and the auras went away. And they have only recurred a few times since then, and always during periods of extreme stress. So, what we learned from this is that apparently demons respond to medication. 2 weeks later, after my judicial committee meeting, I got a phone call from unwitting granddad at 2 a.m. And he was at the hospital in the labor and delivery department with his daughter, who he had no idea was pregnant. She had stomach pains. They took her to the ER. Oh, look, she's in labor. And wow. And he was crying and he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He said, you should appeal. But of course I didn't, because I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. The whole thing was I just wanted them to leave me alone. I just wanted to walk away. And I told them that. I just want you to leave me alone. But no. In that situation, no. Again, I don't think these elders even considered the idea that God might speak to them, or that there might even be a right or wrong decision. I think that most elders believe that they are right and they have divine backing regardless of the ethical consequences of their decision, simply because they have the title elder. That title means to them in their minds that their decisions and their biases and their opinions are actually those of Jehovah. And you better not dare ever question them. I think that if there was a God, and if it actually spoke to them, they would probably assume that there was some sort of demonic activity or something. Yeah. If not, they would probably immediately announce that they were anointed and start eating the crackers and drinking the Mogan David. But, I admit here that I could be slightly biased because I was on the receiving end of the judicial justice, as it were. So this is where Joe comes in. And I'm putting a link to Joe's channel in the description to this video, because I think that if you're interested in the answer to this question, you need to go listen to some of his videos. He's amazing. So this is what he had to say. He said, no, the elders do not believe that Jehovah is talking to them. However, they do pray for Holy Spirit. He says, this is why the judicial committee system is so flawed. Number one, the elders have to adhere to the many guidelines in the Shepherd the Flock of God book. These guidelines are man-made and based on so-called human wisdom. That's a very good point, because all through thinking about my experience, I didn't even know about the Shepherd book. I didn't find out about that until I started doing research after I had been disfellowshipped, and I was kind of amazed by that they have like a procedure manual. Number 2, from Joe's answer, there is a lot of favoritism and nepotism. I definitely believe that. Number 3, every man on the judicial committee can have a different interpretation of the guidelines. And by the way, Joe didn't say this, but my opinion also on that is there's probably some reading comprehension issues. I mean, these are not typically educated people, or people who clearly don't have critical thinking skills. They are interpreting these guidelines from the society. So that could be a big issue. Number 4, I was only on 12 judicial committees, thank God. Dude, that's a lot of judicial committees. And the fact that Joe says only here makes me wonder how many judicial committees there are in a given congregation in a given year. I mean, wow. For some reason that question's never occurred to me. But I would be interested to know how many there are. Joe says, my opinion is that it is not only a flawed system, but some men have used judicial committees for their own gain. Many times some men would already have a decision in their mind before even meeting with the person. The men judging are so imperfect. In fact, there have been many times that men were on judicial committees as they were judging, committing serious sin. This happens all too often. So if the elders are divinely directed or divinely inspired or whatever, how could that happen? Joe says, in fact, I was on both sides of judicial committees. I confess to the elders. They went for the jugular with me because the elders assigned to my committee did not like me. I can see that because they're a jealous bunch. I can see that by the way they went after my dad through his children in our old congregation. And I will admit that I don't know Joe in person, but I've watched his videos and emailing with him briefly. He is so kind and so real and sweet. And I have to ask seriously, how could anybody not like this guy? I mean, I don't get it. I'm not seeing it. I mean, I'm not doubting you, Joe. I'm sure they were assholes, but how could anybody not like you? Okay, so he says, I found out that one of the elders was committing fornication the same time he judged me. Judicial committees are flawed big time. True, in the book of James it says, if a person sins, go to the older men. It does not say how many. In addition, it states that their prayers would make that person well. So, maybe the original idea when the Bible was written or whatever was so that people would take their problems to the older men because the older men had lived a little bit more life experience and were wiser and could maybe give them good advice. Maybe the purpose was not intended to mete out punishment, tear their families apart, and ruin their lives. What an interesting thought. So, there you have it. Do the elders believe they are spoken to by God? No, they do not. Do they judge based on their own opinions and past experiences? Yes, they do. And I would also add that they judge based on their own self-interest, their own biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious. Do any of the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they are spoken to directly by God, or would that be considered demons? Now, I think some of them actually do think that God talks to them, but those people are most likely untreated schizophrenics. We actually had one of those in our Kingdom Hall when I was growing up, and that was quite harrowing to watch. And my final thought on this is, if you haven't seen it yet, go out. I'm going to put the link to this in the description as well. Go out to faithleaks.org. They recently leaked a file. It was a sexual abuse investigation, and all of the elders' notes and comments and letters and all of these things are available for you to download and read. And this is very, very telling. If you read it, you will see very clearly that these are just a bunch of men who enjoy being in power, and they're not qualified, they're not trained, they have no idea how to deal with this type of situation, and they do so much damage. They leave tons of destroyed lives and ripped apart families in their wake every day, and I think some of them truly enjoy doing that. Others, I think of like my father, like my grandfather was, like Joe was. I feel like they are good elders, and they take the role to heart, and they take it seriously, and they want to help people. And I think that those elders struggled with being on judicial committees, and I think that those elders eventually either step down, as my grandfather did, or they leave the organization like Joe. So that's that. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to leave your questions in the comment section for the next episode of Ask Sister Pfister.